One of the interesting things about having a child with diabetes is that people tend to make strange assumptions about your faith and about what God is doing. I remember speaking to one person once who, when it became apparent that I was speaking of my child who has diabetes, she said, "But isn't she a Christian?" I went, "Well, she's quite young, but I think she's got faith." And she was very surprised that someone who was a Christian would have such a debilitating disease. Diabetes, yeah, I know. Diabetes is, it's life-threatening at times. I have dealt with people who have got all sorts of strange and bizarre ideas about what healing is supposed to look like, what the life of faith is supposed to include. And I very patiently and very gently said to this person, well, just because someone's sick doesn't mean they're not a Christian. We live in a world that's busted and broken, and we will all die. Ultimately, dying is a failure of healing. That was a little confronting. See, this person, like a lot of people that I've spoken to, are people who go after Jesus looking for miracles. My criticism of some churches that are like that is that they encourage people to look for miracles, but they only look for the spectacular miracles. Who's had Panadol in the past week? Or paracetamol? Like, now go for a month without it, and then tell me what sort of miracle that is. Tonight we're taking a breather from 2 Samuel and we're having a look at Matthew's Gospel. This is chapter 8, which we heard read. Here we see people getting healed and people chasing Jesus, and some strange comments from Jesus. But friends, I guess this is why we have these expectations sometimes, and I want to look at them and see what we should expect. But first of all, what's just happened? Okay, the people in Jesus. So Jesus, in chapter 8, verse 1, Jesus has come down from the mountain. Where was he? Jesus was up on the mountain preaching the Sermon on the Mount. That's about 4 chapters of Matthew's Gospel. It's a long sermon. You guys think I talk for a long time. Jesus could talk for days. The people have just heard him preaching, and now they follow him. And they watch as he interacts with people. Okay, but then people come to him. They've heard him preaching, but they come to him because they have a need. And we're going to see 3 people who come to Jesus with a need in verses 1 to 17, as well as other people who are around, and they're just called the many. We see 2 things here. Firstly, we see Jesus' power, and secondly, we see his compassion. His power in that he heals people completely, instantly, and his compassion, and he does things that no one else would do. Firstly, his power. These people are under the curse of death. The leper that we see in verse 1 is completely cut off from society. But you and I think, oh, well, you've got an infectious or contagious disease. You stay at home. You certainly don't give it to my children. And you just cut yourself off from society for a week. You get better and you go out. Someone who had leprosy, people would throw rocks at them to keep them away. They couldn't enter into a town. If they saw someone coming towards them, they would shout out, "Unclean! Unclean!" They couldn't wear proper clothes. They wore rags. I don't know how these people ate. They couldn't go to the well to get water because that would make the well unclean, and all of the people who drank from it unclean. He was cut off from his family. He was excluded from his friends. He couldn't go to the synagogue or to the temple. He was cut off from God. And he comes to Jesus, and you see what Jesus does. He reaches out and touches him and completely heals him. He instantly heals him. And then says, go to the temple and offer the sacrifices that are commanded. Why does he go to the temple? It's not to be healed, it's not to be cleansed, but it's to offer a testimony, presumably to the priests. Presumably so that the priests would know what Jesus is doing. Now look at the centurion in verse 5. Jesus comes to Capernaum, which is where he did a lot of his miracles. His servant is in bed, paralysed and unable to get up. He's racked with pain. He can't move to alleviate the pain. Have you ever been sick or hurt or sore and you're lying in bed, and sometimes if you just move a little bit, it doesn't hurt as badly? He can't even do that. He can't care for himself. He can't use the toilet on his own. He is in fear of death because he has no way of providing for himself. Jesus comes to town. Jesus heals him without touching him, without seeing him, without anything. Jesus speaks, and his word heals the servant of the centurion. Jesus shows himself to be completely different from other healers. Other healers would, they might come into the room and they might jump up and down and scream or pour things on the guy, or, if you go to some churches, hit him in the head. All sorts of things like that. Jesus just doesn't even speak a word. He says to the centurion, your servant has been healed. Jesus speaks and the sickness is gone. Finally, Peter's mother-in-law. Just by the way, this is evidence that Peter was married. No one takes the mother-in-law without the wife. Just saying. My mother-in-law watches YouTube. You might think that a fever is nothing. I mean, honestly, take a Panadol and get over it. In the first century, 90% of fevers immediately preceded death. That is, 9 out of 10 people who got a fever were dead in a week. We know that the fever is not the killer, it's the bacterial infection that comes with the fever. But they knew it was the fever. And so when Jesus walks into Peter's home, he sees the mother-in-law under the threat of death. She's got a 1 in 10 chance of living. And he sees her and he heals her instantly. Do you notice that? Guys, we had a sleep, some of us had a sleepover, I don't know what to call it that, on Friday night. And so I just went for a night without sleeping, right? And I got to sleep for 4 hours, and then, after everyone had gone home, and I got up after 4 hours of sleep, and I was groggy, and I was like, oh, okay, have something to eat, clear my head, get about 5 cups of coffee down me. Jesus walks in, touches her hand, and she gets up instantly. She's healed. She doesn't think, oh, I'm feeling a bit better, maybe in a couple of days I'll be okay. She is instantly healed. I mean, have you guys ever had the flu? Not a cold, which is commonly interpreted as the flu by members of a particular gender. No, the flu, where you're in bed, you're racked with pain, you've got a fever, you can't, you know what I'm talking about. Imagine that, and then standing up. This is what happens. This woman is in all sorts of pain, under the threat of death. Jesus touches her hand, and she is completely and totally healed. And then she serves lunch. She doesn't just go, oh wow, she goes, I'm so much better. I'm going to cook. Now, whenever I've just recently gone over an illness, I'm not cooking now. I'm like, oh babe, yeah, coffee, that'd be so good. Yeah, oh, what's for dinner? Oh,